Hello, and welcome to the 61st episode of NeoHuman Podcast. I'm Agah Bahari, Edgologist on Twitter and Instagram, and you can follow this show on liveinlimbo.com, iTunes, YouTube, and BitChute. And today with me, I have Alex Vikoulov. Welcome to NeoHuman Podcast, Alex.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. I've been following some of your posts on Facebook for quite some time. We've been Facebook friends, and it just seemed like a very, very interesting person. And I know that you've had a new book called the Syntellect Hypothesis, 5 Paradigms of the Mind's Evolution. You're wearing the t-shirts of the same book, I believe, right now as well. So definitely want to hear your perspective about everything that is going on with respect to digitization and data and all of that, and talk a little about your book. But let's start with your background, the lives you've lived, the work you've done, and what are you mainly focused on now these days?
Absolutely. So, yeah, I hope we'll have a fantastic conversation. I'm a Russian-American futurist, evolutionary cyberneticist, digital philosopher, not to be confused with digital photographer. Idealist, not a perfectionist type, but Platonist type. Was born and raised in Russia, immigrated to the U.S. in 1994 at the age of 24. Studied humanities at Tom State University back in Russia, and continued my studies here when I came to California. Graduated from Armstrong University with degrees in finance and economics. So my background is mostly in economics. I worked in the corporate world. I worked in the startup world, ran Psychedelics Media Group, which is a PR, digital media, and publishing company. So, yeah, this is pretty much in a nutshell my background, but philosopher by vocation, but I'm a strong believer that you learn by doing. Had this predilection towards physics and philosophy ever since I was a kid. You know, it was growing in the background, but for some reason I was thinking about being economically satisfied and thinking about money in the early age. But it's changed since then. For the most part, right now, I'm consumed with spiritual growth. And that's why I started this creative project, Psychedelic Media, my blog about 5 years ago. There's a number of essays I wrote, and I saw that the public actually likes it. That was my launch pad to write the book, which is the work of 3 years of theorizing and put it on paper, let alone decades of being a human in this simulated reality.
Simulated reality, yeah, exactly.
We'll talk about later, but that's...
Well, you mentioned you're an idealist. I want to know what is your, and you also mentioned that you're on a spiritual path, which is interesting to me because it has a very strong digital element to it. And I'm coming from the same kind of a perspective at this point. What is your ideal objective to reach through this spiritual path?
I'm a adherent of objective idealism. Another name for it is absolute idealism, whose forefather was Georg Hegel, the German philosopher. Idealistic perspective based on phenomenology. So basically everything comes down to experiences of conscious agents and their interactions. You know, that's what really exists out there. There is no objective reality, basically, out there. Only subjective reality, only subjective points of view. Most physicists now come to a consensus that information is fundamental. Universality of computation is the most profound thing in the universe, as theoretical physicist David Deutsch notes. Computational underpinnings of our reality, what I stand at.
And the book that we are talking about is the Syntellect Hypothesis. What do you mean exactly by Syntellect? Yes, I'm also showing the link to our viewers, but it's good that yeah, there you have it. Very beautifully designed and well thought of.
Yes, absolutely. The hardcover 2019. Unfortunately, I don't have the second edition 2020 because I send out so many signed copies at the moment, so I don't even have. I have a replenishment today from Amazon.
Amazing. So let's start with, because terminology obviously matters a lot, and there are a number of terms that we were talking about. There is no such a thing as objective reality, which I absolutely agree with. And then it becomes, what is the definition of, for example, hypothesis from your perspective? So these are the kind of things that I'm hoping we can build upon as a result of this conversation for people who might be completely strangers to the idea of digitized mind and hive minds in the way that you're talking about with respect to Syntellect, a synthetic intellect, I would imagine you're talking about, right?
Right. Well, first of all, the term Syntellect is composed of syn, as Greek, together, and intellect, intelligence, right? So the intellectual synergy of people and all other conscious agents, right? So Syntellect is basically, it's a civilizational mind. It's or planetary mind in some context. So it's apt neologisms that I came across when reading Manifesto for Transhumanist Aspirations, I think that was, by Michael Epstein, the book published in 2012. I thought that it would be the most apt neologism that can be used. And so I came up with this the Syntellect Hypothesis name for the book. So the subtitle is 5 Paradigms of the Mind's Evolution. We are storytelling beings, right? We like stories, and everything is basically in our life chronological. So I decided to come up with this paradigms of evolution for the mind, and it makes sense going back to the Big Bang, starting to plot the evolutionary trajectory of individual minds and later collective intelligence and civilizational minds. Any conscious agent is smacked in the middle between its transcendental reality and lower levels of organization. You read the book. This is a holistic system. It's non-linear neural network of some sort. Chronology doesn't always apply. We used to think that the Big Bang is the origin of the universe, but it's not necessarily true. I mean, it depends on the perspective. I mean, everything is perspectival. Yeah, it's easy for us to consume this Big Bang origination story, but the truest view is probably to have some sort of pre-existence of intelligence that actually gave birth to our universe. So, as I say in the book, our world, our universe, is one of the possible worlds simulated by absolute consciousness. The Omega Point cosmology, to which I dedicate a large part of the book, in the words of one of my favorite philosophers of all time, Terence McKenna, transcendental object at the end of time.
Now, my understanding about, for example, Big Bang that you're saying is that when something becomes status quo in academia, people just don't fund anything else to be pursued. It becomes a business.
Yes, it's a paradigm, and all the papers, all the academic research pretty much falls into this mainstream, and by definition confirms the paradigm. Fringe academic research becomes overlooked, but the most advanced science right now, I would say, lies in the computational physics, in the physics of information, which I'm the big proponent of. Digital physics and digital philosophy originated back in 1948 by a mathematical theory of communication, the seminal paper written by Claude Shannon, who proposed information can be quantifiable. Everything comes now to the binary logic of nature, and this is like universal Kant. Nature speaks in its own kind of language, and we are part of nature. We are part of the same continuum. We are part of this evolving cosmos, so to speak.
That's interesting when you say that everything is in bits. However, we have already achieved quantum computing. So maybe everything is in qubits.
That's exactly, well, yeah, I mean, you see, actually it's a natural kind of computation, right? I mean, so from the spectrum of possibilities, like from the quantum potentiality, nature finds a definite outcome in binary code. So basically, from quantum potentiality to classical actuality of our experience,
So
that's quantum computation, right? So
the
yeah, I mean,
choices, the choices are binary, but options are quantum, is what you're saying.
yes, and actually, it all comes down to our experiential self, to our experiential reality. Every single moment, conscious moment. As a matter of fact, I put out there the conscious instant hypothesis. As human beings, we experience about 10 to 30 conscious instants per second, right? It's kind of like integrated information by cognitive scientist Julie Tononi. Confluent digital data stream. Integrated information gives rise to this one conscious instant. Mm-hmm. And the sequence of conscious instants, that's what represents stream of consciousness for us as human beings.
The way that I think about consciousness is like consciousness is internet, and the way that we are experiencing it is like our devices. So we can have access to it through our own browser, but it's just, if it's deleted, that version of it is gone, but the consciousness is over there.
Yeah, consciousness is everything, right?
Yeah.
So there are multiple views. It's such a multifaceted reality that you can view it from different perspectives, a multitude of different angles. So absolutely, you can see it as I like to use this metaphor, consciousness to humans as cloud to computers. We are like nodes of this human cloud, so to speak, right? And we are part of this larger whole. We don't exist in the vacuum. We are part of the larger pattern of life. We have this transcendent effect, and that's what I talk about in the book, that we actually re-emerge as one global mind. At some point, it's going to be like a Solaris kind of planetary mind, right? When we're going to have like this hyperconnectivity of billions of enhanced humans and super intelligent machines as nodes of this global neural network, enhance these trillions of sensors around the planet. This is it. This is the Sint Elect emerged. What it means to you as an individual, because consciousness is always singular, right? You cannot get around it. It's always going to be singular. So basically, it's going to be like you transcend to the higher order Sint Elect. You transcend to the God in mind. So when you expand your dimensionality, if we look back at our own evolution, single-celled organisms back 4 billion years ago when life started, they were perceiving existence in a one-dimensional plane of existence. And then plant and animals expanded their dimensionality to 2 and 3 dimensions. Now humans, we experience in 3D plus time, fractal dimension.
Right.
Time goes for us in one direction because we are anchored to biochemical processes. But it's about to change. When you transcend this low dimensionality, and you can have this expanded dimensionality, which might be 5D or 6D or 7D. Part 4 in my book, Theogenesis. Basically, we becoming gods. The birth of a divine entity, the Theogenesis. That's what I call it.
Now, before we go any further, because for some people, this might sound really strange or sci-fi like, let me just bring up maybe a more foundational concept that also came to my mind called the extended mind theory, an idea in the field of philosophy of mind often called extended cognition, which holds that the reach of the mind needs not end at the boundaries of a skin and skull. So the idea is that even if you use a piece of paper to write your shopping list on it, that becomes extension of your mind. So what Alex is talking about is because of digitization, this is potentially something that can include everything.
We distribute our mindedness across the globe. As we speak, I'm in Silicon Valley, you in Toronto, right?
I'm actually in South Florida.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's like My bad, my bad.
No, it just reminds me of being in Toronto in January in that cold, and I'm glad that I'm not there. So,
Yeah, my bad.
no, all good.
All right. Anyway, we have this technocultural kind of wormhole between two minds, and we grab other minds that wants to tag along. So it's all kind of collectivity, transcendent effect. At some point, we'll probably transcend our language, our human languages. I mean, we don't have to speak anymore. We can transmit thought, and we can be like mind broadcasting and communication telepathically. That's what is called synthetic telepathy. I have some parts of the book dedicated to that as well.
Now, that's a beautiful part of it. The scary part of it is that now this conversation that you and I are having through this wormhole, the data of it will be owned by Microsoft at the end of the day, because Skype is Microsoft owns Skype, and data is being collected at this point by centralized structures of authority, whether it's Google or Microsoft or Facebook or Amazon. What is your thought about this ownership of data moving forward, considering, we have begun the decade of Internet of Things and big data and ubiquitous computing?
Well, I'm extremely optimistic about the future, and that's why you have to add this spiritual dimension, because this is a holistic system, right? So we are all God, in the matter of speaking, right? We all some kind of fractals of this greater cosmic mind. So evolution of patterns, this is how the universe evolves. I mean, it evolves through us. And we can have all kinds of interactions. Even if you have wars, this is how the global mind actually put to test all kinds of hypotheses, through us as neurons of the global mind.
So you're not worried about it?
I don't worry about it at all. Then again, every single individual lives in their own virtual perceptual universe. So because it's a quantum multiverse, by your thought, you move in a certain trajectory. But all the paths to the ultimate divine is valid. I don't want to sound overly religious, but as Rumi said, I searched for God and I found myself. I searched for myself and I found God. It's all holistic system. It's sort of typical of the biological brain. You can have like all kinds of different ideas, angel on one shoulder, demon on the other. You always have these different ideas and hypotheses that need to be put to test. But at the end of the day, we figure things out. We're on the right track, nonetheless.
I totally agree. And, the spiritual side of all of these things for me, I don't know where it's coming from initially, but it was empowered by the use of psychedelics and alongside reading and listening to Terence McKenna. Now, you mentioned Terence McKenna. Have you also had any spiritual, religious, however you want to call it, experiences with psychedelics, with the understanding of data and information alongside with Terence McKenna and spirituality that put things together right in front of your face?
Life is a psychedelic trip. Psychedelic is basically mind manifesting, right? I mean, we live in mind-based reality. No matter how you slice it, everything is mental. And everything comes down to consciousness. Physicists now agree that quantum theory is the most successful theory of all time. Show that you cannot separate reality from the observer. Experience and experiences are one. There is so-called the measurement problem and quantum effect versus observer effect. You cannot separate the observers. So it's always the observer that manifests its own reality. It's like in the movie Inception, you create and perceive, right? It's like always like a feedback loop, the Ouroboros code. By the way, this is the book by my good friend, digital philosopher, Antonin Kuhlmann. He wrote the Ouroboros code and published by Extradelic Media Group, by the way. So, yeah, consciousness is the totality of feedback loop. So everything comes down to what I call experiential realism. And in terms of psychedelics, I mean, if you find certain venue to explore your psyche, that's great. We just have to embrace it. As a matter of fact, as humankind, we experience two major singularities, and we're in the midst of so-called cyberdelic singularity as we speak. The first singularity, according to Kevin Kelly, Wired magazine founder and editor, technoprophet himself, was back 50,000 years ago with the invention of language, linguistic singularity. How can you explain a Shakespearean limerick to an ape? It's just completely inconceivable. So that was a linguistic singularity for human species. And now in the 1960s, you've got this cyberdelic singularity, the confluence of psychedelic culture, LSD and psilocybin mushrooms, mescaline, etc., etc. And when we went out to space, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was the first to orbit Earth in 1961. Cyberspace created the first computers. So cyberspace, outer space, and inner space. That was this cyberdelic singularity outside. Unfortunately, someone got scared, and as we know, the Nixon administration made psychedelics illegal. Right now, they were going through the renaissance of psychedelics, but still illegal, and some of them on the Schedule 1. As I said in my book, I believe as we go further into the future, psychedelics is information technology. As Terence McKenna once said, the difference between computers and drugs is that you can swallow one and you cannot swallow the other, but the brightest minds in Silicon Valley and beyond are working to change that.
Well, Terence McKenna also himself, he had the stoned ape theory, that the reason that our mind evolved much faster than the rest of our body is because of psychedelics.
Yeah, the stoned ape theory, I'm quite supportive of it. That gave a huge advantage to Homo sapiens over other hominid species, I believe. These drugs are consciousness expanding drugs. There are different levels. Smaller doses makes you visually acute, so you can accurately appreciate the situation between the predator and prey, etc. Visual acuity is a huge game changer, right? At the average dose, you're agitated and sexually active, which is the main game in evolution, sexual reproduction, right? And at the highest dose, go into different higher spiritual dimension and bring some souvenirs, to share with your tribesmen.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful way to put it, because, I've been experimenting with them for more than 10 years, and the meaning of them changed a lot, but that was based on what I was learning outside of the experience and through the experience. You get out of it what you put into it, because if you go with the mind of a, chimp, you're not going to think about, maybe we can digitize the entire universe and quantify the patterns and make sense out of existence.
Yes. Well, we are on the cusp of going more into inner space. That's why I'm quite fond of the transcension hypothesis by futurist John Smart. Inner space exploration is where we actually headed. We are gonna have more computational density and basically become virtual minds, substrate independent digital minds. But for that, you have to use black hole physics to go inside.
Yeah, transcension hypothesis, that's one of the possible solutions to the Fermi Paradox as well. So most advanced civilizations, they become post-biological. So they just phase out biology altogether and become digital minds instead. But because we are on exponential trend for miniaturization, you just need more and more computational density, and you just go inside. Creates multitude of virtual worlds, and you have this apotheosis of the mind, just like live in the inner space of your own design. So you don't need this space-time, you don't need the universe out there. You just can send out probes and colonize and basically convert the matter of the universe into computronium. That's probably the ultimate destiny of our universe, to convert the rest of the universe into computronium, but for our own needs, because we go inside our minds.
Do you think there are other civilizations that reach the same kind of because it seems like if you want to talk about this within a maybe more familiar kind of concept, Kardashev scale, for example, that we first have to become a planetary kind of a civilization, and huge part of it, part of that now relies on computation and digitization for us to make sense out of what is happening, and it starts from there, right? So I think the biggest threat to this progress, which from my perspective is inevitable, but the biggest threat to slowing it down is lack of education. Would you agree with that?
The nature of education will probably change. So if you can just download knowledge, in the matrix, all we need is just computational resources. And what we are right now, on the global scale, we are one thinking entity, basically, right? I mean, the whole humankind is one thinking entity. All we need is computational resources. And we process information at a certain capacity, right? But with super intelligent machines coming online, we'll have more and more capacity, which will at some point eclipse biological minds, right? But because we're going to merge with this technology, we'll become super intelligences ourselves. So this is why I'll call it the cybernetic singularity instead of the technological singularity. In fact, speaking of singularities, we'll have plurality of singularities going forward, in my view.
Well, it depends on the context, right?
Yeah, everything is contextual, of course. Going forward, say circa 2030, we'll have most probably AGI, right? Artificial general intelligence, human level AI, right? And we're not just talking about logical intelligence, we're talking about emotional intelligence, so that you can speak just like you speak to me, right? This whole array of human emotions, so to speak. This is going to be like AGI singularity. And then later on, we'll have, most probably, again, it's all speculative at this point, but some kind of simulation singularity, right? When you can create ultra-realistic virtual realities and where you can recreate historical events to the minute detail and come up with a myriad of fantasy worlds. Basically, that's when you expand your dimension. So the simulation singularity, which is pretty cool, right? About I don't know. Let's put 2035, circa 2035, when mind uploading will become reality, pretty much. When we all have some kind of personal exocortex on the cloud, and by the end of 2030s, we'll probably have thinking predominant on the cloud. But because it's not limited by our cranial capacity, our biological wetware, we can extend indefinitely in the computational capacity of our own mind.
And you give us to get to the point of mind uploading and creating basically our own versions of reality first in a more, it's like a VR experience, but at some point the idea is that you wouldn't be able to even tell the difference between what's virtual and what's real. And you give it about 15 years.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, I already have like virtual reality headset where I meditate regularly, and it's already pretty awesome, right? But human beings have only 10 to 30 conscious instances per second. High resolution of our vision is at the end of the arc, right? If you look at your thumb, this is psychedelic. And there are already prototypes in virtual reality that can actually replicate resolution of human eyesight. It's going to be like multi-sensory virtual reality, of course. I mean, we have augmented reality. It's all going to be like a video game. Like already there's this smart contact lens by Mojo Vision that, it's a prototype, but we'll probably have some internet connected contact lenses sometime within 5 years in mainstream use, so that you can just look at something and have additional information. So it's all going to be like a video game. for everyone, and just you can actually customize it for your own needs, which is pretty cool.
For sure, for sure. I'm gonna take the non-stop dog barking as a sign of coming from the universe that we should wrap up this interview. What is next for you, and where can our audience follow your work?
Well, the best way is to go to extradelicnet.net online and see all the updates and a bunch of videos. I have a mini series of Extradelics with Alex Vikoulov, and I have new books listed on the website, and of course essays and news that we put out regularly on our website. But I would highly recommend to get my book, the Syntellect Hypothesis, 5 Paradigms of the Mind's Evolution, and just get mind blown, the possibilities. And this is just self-transcendence, engineering godhood, self-divinization. That's where we are headed to.
And I will include the links to both your website and your book, and other links alongside with the podcast as well.
Book trailer.
Oh, right. I will include that one as well. It's the 5 minutes long one. I actually watched it right before coming online to speak with you, and I watched it with my girlfriend, who's a filmmaker, and she just made a visual representation of our episode with Michio Kaku. And it reminded her also and me of that video, the trailer. Very, very cool. And what a cool idea to have trailer for book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Based on reception, which country do you think, or what group of readers in which country are more susceptible and accepting of the ideas that you're talking about?
Well, first is the U.S., of course. The U.S., and then the U.K., Canada, and European countries, the most susceptible. Australia, yes. I mean, developed world, I would say.
One thing that I talked about this with Zoltan Isvan as well, and it always brings up a lot more to talk about it, how, for example, while China is going along with genetic engineering and experimenting with human DNA and the very core of who we are, the religious aspect of a country like United States seem to be, or it would be fair to think of it as some kind of a boundary or some kind of an obstacle in front of this scientific or technological progress. How do you see that? That, for example, Chinese, who, they don't have any religious state. The religious state is a party, just following what the party objective is. But they're not limited by any kind of religious text to stop human engineering. So they can progress in that front, while Americans arguing whether or not that is something that can be done in a society as religious as the United States.
Right. Well, as I said, I'm pretty optimistic about the future. So any competition brings out the best out of us. We'll figure things out. There might be some pitfalls, some setbacks, but generally we're on the right track. Any nation has some kind of contribution to the overall progress of the species.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. I totally agree with it. I mean, there are parts that we can control, and we control those. There are parts that we cannot control, and we cannot control. And big picture seems to be fine.
Actually, not everything is up to us, because the heuristic tendencies of the universe to create emergent patterns is stronger than the human race itself. This intellect emergence that I'm talking about in the book is the cosmic necessity. That's the inevitable evolutionary leap for our species as we go forward.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you think of it as an inevitability, because it seems like an inevitability to me. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not going to stay as we are. We're not the pinnacle of evolution, not biological, not technological either.
Totally agree. All right, Alex, let me ask you the last question I ask all my guests, that if you come across an intelligent alien from a different civilization, what would you say is the worst thing humanity has done? And what would you say is humanity's greatest achievement?
First of all, I won't believe that we're going to see alien life in our human universe. We have to transcend our dimensionality first, right? So we, probably at the Sint Elect level, we're going to meet some extra-dimensional alien intelligence as opposed to extraterrestrial. At that point, we just have to establish communication and exchange information. It's all about exchanging information, our histories and our cultures, and it's going to be a great enrichment to both parties. Our greatest achievement, keeping our beautiful planet as it is, and taking care of other lesser intelligences and keeping things in check.